Hi, and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, we'll be featuring the case of Susan Smith. This was a recommendation by friend of the show, Dancing Firefly. Thank you, Firefly, for the suggestion. Now, let's go ahead and find out more. Let's go ahead and dive on in. Susan Lee Vaughn Smith was born September 26, 1971, in Union, South Carolina. She was the only daughter born to Linda, a homemaker, and Harry, a firefighter. Harry also worked in one of the textile mills that surrounded Union. Harry and Linda's marriage had many conflicts. At times, things even escalated to the point where Harry became violent and then threatened to kill Linda and then himself. Harry's violence was the result of his alcoholism and his obsession with the idea that Linda was unfaithful. In 1977, Linda divorced Harry. Susan was 6 years old at the time. Harry was devastated by the divorce. He became even more depressed and continued to drink heavily. January 15th, 1978, 5 weeks after Harry and Linda's divorce became final, Harry committed suicide. Shortly after her divorce was final, Linda went on to remarry. She married a man named Beverly, also known as Bev, Russell. He was a businessman who owned an appliance store in downtown Union. Bev had previously been married as well and had several daughters from his first marriage. Now, at 13 years old, Susan attempted suicide for the first time. Besides that, in school, Susan actually did pretty well. She was a member of the Math, Spanish, and Red Cross clubs. Susan volunteered in Union's annual Special Olympics and worked with the elderly. During Susan's senior year of high school in 1989, she was even voted friendliest female for Union High School. 1987, Susan was about to celebrate her 16th birthday. One night, the family were all in the living room on the sofas. She ended up falling asleep. When she woke up later, she found Bev touching her breasts. Bev also placed Susan's hands on his lap. Susan later told her mother about the incident, but she also told her mother she did not object to Bev's behavior because, quote, she wanted to see how far he would go, end quote. Susan filed a complaint against Bev and it was investigated by the South Carolina Department of Social Services and the Union County Sheriff's Office. Bev, Linda, and Susan went for family counseling, but they only went about 4 or 5 times before discontinuing their sessions. During the investigation, Bev agreed to move out of the family home, but a short time later, he moved back in. In the summer of 1988, between her junior and senior years of high school, Susan began working at the Winn-Dixie supermarket. Her first job at the market was as a cashier, but within 6 months, she was promoted to head cashier. She was then again later promoted to being the market's bookkeeper. At the beginning of her senior year in high school, Susan began to secretly date one of her coworkers. He was an older, married man. Shortly after starting this relationship, Susan became pregnant and had an abortion. At the same time this relationship was occurring, Susan was also dating another coworker. However, the older married coworker found out about this other relationship Susan was having, so he ended his relationship with Susan. How did she take it? Not well at all. Susan became deeply depressed over the breakup. In November 1988, she attempted to commit suicide by taking an overdose of aspirin and Tylenol. Susan was admitted to the hospital and remained hospitalized for 1 week. When Susan was released from the hospital, she became friends with David Smith. He was one of the stock clerks at the Winn-Dixie. They began to date. However, he was actually engaged to somebody else, a woman named Christy Jennings. By January 1991, after dating for about a year, Susan found out she was pregnant. David told his fiancee Christy about Susan. Christy broke off her engagement with David immediately. So David and Susan decided to get married. October 10th, 1991, David and Susan welcomed first child, son Michael Daniel Smith. Susan continued to work part-time at the Winn-Dixie and enrolled in several college courses at the University of South Carolina in Union. Early on in their marriage, David and Susan felt a great deal of tension. One of the areas that caused the most tension between David and Susan was money. In addition, another area of tension was David's relationship with Susan's mother, Linda. Linda and David really did not get along with one another. Linda often offered unsolicited advice and opinions about how David and Susan were raising their son Michael and how she felt they should deal with problems in their marriage. Another stress on their marriage was the fact that Susan and David both worked together at the same place, the Winn-Dixie. By this time, David was actually Susan's boss. By their third year of marriage, David and Susan had separated several times already. In addition, both of them were having extramarital affairs. Susan became pregnant in November 1992. In December, David and Susan decided to try again to live together under the same roof. August 5th, 1993, David and Susan welcomed second child, son Alexander Tyler Smith. Within 3 weeks of Alex's birth, Susan and David decided to end their marriage. So David moved out. After recovering from Alex's birth, Susan ended up getting a new job at Conso Products as a bookkeeper. Susan really enjoyed working there, but it wasn't just for the job. It was for another reason. Tom Finlay. Tom was one of the sons of the owner. August, David had rented a 2-bedroom apartment about 2 miles from the house where Susan, Michael, and Alex lived. He bought new furniture for his apartment and set up a bedroom with a bed, a crib, and new toys for Michael and Alex. So they were all set up anytime they came over to visit. Susan was now beginning to believe that her dreams of love and stability might be realized with Tom. However, October 25th, 1994, Tom ended his relationship with Susan. He was beginning to feel that Susan was too possessive and too needy. He told her they would remain friends, but that, quote, our intimate relationship will have to stop forever, end quote. Later that evening, Sue Brown was eating dinner at a restaurant with several friends. One of those friends was Tom Finlay. During the meal, a waiter brought a cordless telephone to Sue. On the other end, Susan Smith. She was calling to ask Sue if Tom had asked about her. Sue told Susan he didn't. At 8:00 p.m., Susan dressed her 2 sons, placed them in the car, and began driving around Union. What happened next? Susan then reported to the police that she had been carjacked by an African-American man who drove away with their son still in the car. She went on television and made dramatic pleas for the rescue and return of her children. Investigators, however, had been suspicious of Susan's story from the very beginning. They felt she knew where her children were. Tom called Susan and expressed his sympathies about Michael and Alex. Immediately, Susan shifted the topic of conversation away from missing children to her relationship with Tom. Tom told Susan not to worry about their relationship, to concentrate on her children. This telephone call would be the last communication between Susan and Tom. October 26th, 1994, David, with Susan by his side, stood on the steps of the Union County Sheriff's Department and made the following statement, quote, to whoever has our boys, we ask that you please don't hurt them and bring them back. We love them very much. I plead to the guy, please return our children to us safe and unharmed. Everywhere I look, I see their play toys and pictures. They are both wonderful children. I don't know how else to put it, and I can't imagine life without them. End quote. October 27th, 1994. Susan and her husband David took a polygraph test. The results were inconclusive, but investigators felt that it indicated Susan was lying when she was asked the question, "Do you know where your children are?" A big break in the case had to do with her story on where she was hijacked. The particular red light that she says she stopped was only triggered when a car coming from across the street approached. According to her, there were no other cars around, so there would have been no reason for her to stop at this intersection. November 3rd, 1994. Susan was taken to a safe house for another interrogation. Sheriff Wells confronted Susan about her story of the carjacking. Wells told Susan that he knew Susan's story about the black carjacker was a lie. Susan dropped her head and cried, quote, "I am so ashamed. I am so ashamed," end quote. She asked Sheriff Wells for his gun so that she could kill herself. Sheriff Wells asked Susan why she wanted to do that, and Susan replied, quote, "You don't understand. My children are not all right," end quote. Susan confessed to detectives and wrote the following, that she had driven off Highway 49 and onto the road leading to John D. Long Lake because she wanted to commit suicide. She believed that her children would be better off with God than if they were left without a mother and alone. Susan said how much she loved her sons and that she never meant to harm them and that she was sorry. After the car had rolled into the lake, Susan wanted to undo what she had done, but she could not. Divers then arrived at John D. Long Lake. One of the divers located the underside of the upside-down Mazda vehicle. It was down approximately 18 feet of water. At the place in the lake where the car was located, visibility was only 12 inches. The divers observed that all of the windows were rolled up and that all 4 doors were closed. Then one diver stated he saw, quote, "a small hand against the window glass," end quote. They were in the car seats, hanging upside down. In the car was also a letter from Tom Finlay telling Susan that their relationship was over. November 4th, 1994. Autopsies confirmed that the children had been alive when their mother sent them in the car into the lake, and that they drowned as the car was submerged. May 1995. Susan and David divorced and it became final. In the final divorce settlement, David and Susan divided Michael and Alex's toys and clothing in half. David received the Mazda. He later had it destroyed after Susan's trial was completed. July 11th, 1995. After a 2-day hearing, Judge Howard ruled that Susan was mentally competent to stand trial. During the trial, Susan's defense psychiatrist diagnosed her with dependent personality disorder. In her trial, her stepfather admitted that he had molested her when she was a teenager. But not only that, he admitted that they had consensual sex as an adult. Her lawyer's strategy during this trial seemed to put the blame on severe mental depression for the deaths, calling the killings a failed suicide because she planned to drown herself as well. Mrs. Smith's defense lawyers have said repeatedly that twice released the handbrake as she sat in the car, contemplating killing herself and her children. Prosecutors, however, wanted none of that. They argued Susan wanted relief from her loneliness and problems in her life. Susan and her husband David were in the middle of divorce, and her boyfriend Tom Finlay had just rejected her the week before because he did not want a relationship with a woman who had children. So Susan drove to a dark lake and sent her car rolling into the water with the 2 little boys strapped inside their car seats. She did not release the brake and jump from the car. in a last-second instinct for survival. Her clothes were not dirty, and they were not torn. She had to stand outside the car and release the brake, which meant that she had no intention of dying that night. David Espy, who was the FBI agent who administered several of the polygraph tests to Susan, testified in court that Susan, quote, would make sobbing noises, but when I looked at her eyes, there was no water. There were no tears, end quote. Tom Finlay testified in court as well. He said that he had written a letter to Susan telling her that he did not want to be in a relationship with somebody that had children. 3 of Susan's coworkers from Quantico testified that Susan had on several separate occasions told them she wondered how her life would be different if she had not gotten married, and especially if she didn't have children at a young age. The jury ended up finding Susan guilty of 2 counts of murder. July 29th, 1995, a jury decided that Susan should not be put to death, but she should spend the rest of her life in prison for the drowning of her 2 sons. Michael was 3 years old at the time, and Alexander was only 14 months old. While Susan has been in prison, she has had 2 guards reprimanded for having sex with her. Susan, in 2003, placed a personal ad at writeaprisoner.com. However, this was later retracted. Susan will be eligible for parole November 4th, 2024, after serving a minimum of 30 years. And that is the case of Susan Smith. Thank you for sticking around for another episode of Danny After Dark. And thank you again to Dancing Firefly for the suggestion. Do you have any comments or questions about this case? Leave it down below. Let's be interactive. Do you have a suggestion for a case that you'd like me to cover? Leave it down below. You may see it featured in an upcoming episode. Until next time, remember, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us.